Hey everyone, we know the last thing you need is another fitness podcast to catch you up on the newest trends, fad diets, and fictitious fat-blasting workouts that will be dead in the coming decade. And I need to start over.
You were doing so good. Keep going.
But I said decade really weird.
That was my favorite pronunciation of decade ever. Keep going.
Should I start over? That will be dead in the coming decade. Enter myself, Mariana, and Tony. We made the Fitness Stuff podcast to make exercise and nutrition science practical. Our goal is to expose misinformation in the industry by providing only evidence-based education. For today, we're covering creatine. Tony's going to take you through everything you want to know about creatine, and I am here to probe him with all of the questions that you guys probably have as well. Tony, how are we today?
Marvelous. I like probe. I like that word. I'm marvelous. How are you, Mariana?
I'm good. No complaints. I have some caffeine in me and ready to get going.
I've had way too much because you know how excited I get about creatine.
Yeah.
You know how
when
excited
people
I get
ask
about
me
creatine.
if I'm excited.
Pumps me up. Okay, so we're doing a creatine crash course. The creatine crash course. We are taking you through every freaking step. We do a lot of trends on this show. We cover a lot of trends on social media. What's trending? Can you name a larger trend than creatine over the last probably year that you've seen that's been stuck, that's consistent, that's just been popping off?
I honestly can't, and I feel like this is a topic that's always going to be popular because it is so unique, especially in the exercise science literature, in terms of the amount of studies on it. And that's not something you see often in terms of the efficacy of a supplement. So I don't think it's ever going to go away, and I think it's only going to evolve.
Yeah, I think you're right. And especially, like you said, it's just rare because if you're in the industry and you're honest and truthful, you know that not many supplements really take much of an effect. Like they don't carry that large of an effect to that large of a population. Creatine keeps doing it. So we're doing creatine. Do we call it creatine crash course? Creatine 101?
Creatine
It's
101.
whatever. At the end of the day, you're going to know exactly what you're talking about. So today, the goal of the day, right? We're going to talk about the science of creatine, more specifically, creatine's role in the body in every living human being, regardless of supplementation. So us right now, your mom, my sister, everyone, babies around the world, everyone has creatine inside their body right this second, regardless of supplementation. That's what we want to get out in front of. We're going to also talk about what supplementing with it can change and how we perform, recover, and even think. And I think that's the most exciting thing I'm talking about. After that, we'll talk about more practical application, right, with supplementation practices for who, what, when, where, and how, and then answer some big questions from hair loss to bloating to growth hormone, everything being covered and more. So that's the goal of the episode. And I'm not going to lie, I think this is big, and I ran this by you beforehand because I don't like to hit you with surprises on podcasts. But I do think this is going to be implemented. I think creatine is going to be as common as multivitamins in the coming 5 to 10 years, especially with its effects on mental health and cognition coming up, especially in aging adults. It's not just being shown to be a very useful tool for athletes, which we know and is well documented, but now more and more research going into its effect on aging adults, people just who don't even work out, seeing high benefit from it. Do you agree with that, or do you think I'm just too excited about it?
No, I do agree. I think it's going to be more popular than multivitamins. I honestly don't even think it's on the same playing field as multivitamins because the research on multivitamins is very clear in the sense that they don't do much. Most people don't need to take a multivitamin unless if it's really great for kids, if they don't eat their fruits and veggies. But if you have deficiencies, you're much better targeting those specific deficiencies than taking a multivitamin that has less of each vitamin nutrient you need, and you're also getting nutrients you don't even need. So it just, I don't think they're on the same level playing field in terms of how they can be so useful, because multivitamins.
Okay, that's a hot take. That's even hotter than my take. I just put a big smile on my face because that is 100% true. It's 100% true. Like, as far as study efficacy, like creatine makes sense for most every person, where multivitamins just don't. They sound good, they connect good, but they don't actually, you're not going to notice a difference, where creatine is something that makes noticeable change. Yeah. Dang, that just got me excited because I think you're 100% right.
Multivitamins, maybe another topic for another day.
Oh, 1,000%. I think we could do a whole supplement series. It only makes sense to start off with creatine. Okay, so why we want to talk about it, right? I mean, you now both know that me and Mariana, none of this is going to come off biased. We don't just love it. No, here's why we're talking about it. Here's why we're so excited about it. So one of Mariana and I's favorite websites is for free. It's called examine.com. You can pay for a membership or you can use it for free to look up. I know it's more supplemental based, right? But it actually rounds up all relative evidence and research surrounding certain supplements that has been published. So I first recommend it. I recommend examine.com for anybody looking into taking on a new supplement, just because it gives you something called a human effect matrix, where it rounds up all legitimate research and tells you what the legitimate and noticed effect in study actually carries out with these supplements. So if the newest influencer with their shirt off or their butt in their face is slamming this detox, whatever in your face, and you're like, man, I don't know. It sounds good. They look good. I don't know if I should take it. Look it up on examine.com. It will actually tell you what research has been done, if any, on what someone is trying to sell you. Huge, massive tool. So on examine.com, they round up, and this is probably the hardest topic because creatine, like we were saying before, has the most studies out of a single supplement done in human trial, which is incredible, right? Over 66 studies have shown that it increases power output. 15 studies show that it helps decrease fatigue and increase fatigue resistance during training. At least 3 studies, now I think maybe more, I haven't checked this update in the last few weeks, has been shown promising data that creatine plays a role in improving major depressive disorder and its interaction with SSRIs. 19 different studies show that it can increase your anaerobic capacity during training, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. There is a lot. I think there's close to over 500, even though that sentence didn't make sense. There's over 500 different research studies on creatine. I'm more excited about its role in mental health soon. So that's why we're talking about it. Do you have another reason why? That was a
Yeah, I think mental health is huge. And also that is an area that is evolving really quickly. And we're going to, in the coming, I'd say next 5 years, the research we're going to have on its effect on mental health is going to be even greater than now, because it's newer and like I said, it's ongoing. So that's really exciting to me. And then I also just love it from a performance standpoint. I find it so fascinating how hard people can work in a sport, in the gym, to get to peak performance, and then you have that can elevate you just slightly to see a difference. So say you're a sprinter running 50 meters, taking creatine could be, of course you're training, you're working really hard, but taking creatine could be what you need to take 0.02 seconds off time so that you can win.
Which is huge.
Yeah.
In that setting, that's huge. And I think we'll talk about setting realistic expectations, but just like you said, it can give you that little boost, especially in top performers, where that little difference matters.
Yeah.
That little difference matters a lot. And when it comes down to strength training athletes, and we all know we're not going to see you're not going to double your bench press. You're not going to cut your sprint time in half. Nothing ever is going to do that. Not even anabolics can do that. But it's going to give you that little edge, which, especially if you're an athlete, matters.
Yeah.
The edge matters. So that's why we're talking about it. So before we jump into it, I think it's safe to at least lay the lines of what actually is it, right? You and I are big on definitions. So let's talk about what it actually is before we talk about what it can do. And this is just a little fair warning to everybody. Before someone's telling you what something can do for you, if you don't understand what it is in the first place, you should not act on it, in my opinion. I don't think you should act on it. So that's why we want to describe what it is. So I'll go in soft. I'm sure Mariana is going to come in even harder when we go through what it is. Essentially, we'll go cliff note. I'll give you, if I was explaining this, what creatine is to like a 5th grader, maybe a little bit higher after I realize what I'm about to say. So creatine is a naturally occurring amino acid, right? It's produced by your liver and kidneys. In your human beings, you produce it on your own, and you can find it through dietary sources, right? One of the biggest ones being leaner and red meats, right? You eat it through your diet, right? We're not talking about the supplement. We're talking about what creatine actually is. Right now, this is stored as phosphocreatine in your body. Now, what I think is the most interesting thing is before people just focused on athletes' performance effect, they thought it was just stored in your muscle tissue, where about 95% of creatine is stored, but 5% roughly is actually stored in brain tissue, which I think is the coolest thing, right? Creatine is not just involved in your muscle tissue, heavily it is, but creatine is involved in certain reward pathways inside your brain correlated to improved recognition, memory, and even reducing mental fatigue, things like that. that people tend to forget about. And I think that's why you and I are big on why this is going to be something that probably will be implemented in most people's lives sometime in the future, because it's not just for athletes anymore. It's a lot bigger. That's essentially my baseline description for what it is. Before getting into the process, is there anything you want to add to that I missed?
Yeah, so I think just even to highlight again how our body makes creatine. So that's a huge component, and not too much of it comes from your diet. And this is probably one of the very few times where I'll say supplementing with creatine is definitely superior than just looking for dietary sources of it, especially when it comes to absorption. But how much is readily available in a supplement versus from food is so different. And I really want you guys to pay attention to the stored aspect. It is stored as phosphocreatine. And our body doesn't produce enough to cap out at that storage. So we still have room for more stored creatine. So that is, and I'm sure Tony will talk about that a little bit more, but especially with vitamins and minerals, when you take supplements, there is typically a known cap of, hey, you're taking this much, you're just going to pee it out, you're going to excrete it, it's not effective, and you're probably already getting enough from your diet. Versus creatine, you have a lot of wiggle room in terms of how much more you can store compared to what you're just creating in your body, which is huge.
I think because I've gotten that comment so many times where it's like, why don't you just get it through your diet? It's like, okay, let's be clear. Yes, you can get creatine, and you do get creatine through your diet. But on average, recommended daily doses for adults is around 5 grams. And now the dosages are changing, right? It's anywhere from like 3 to 8 grams, depending on your size and what you're using it for. But on average, people recommend 5 grams of creatine per day. And in 1 pound of beef, you can expect to get about 1 gram of creatine. So for those people who are saying just get it through dietary sources, you would have to be consuming 5 pounds of beef to get 5 grams, the daily recommended amount of creatine, every single day to hit that number. So is it in food? Yes. Can you get everything you need from it? When we're talking about creatine, like, absolutely not. 1 pound, like, imagine eating 1 pound of beef in a sitting. That'd be ridiculous.
The old vegan in me can't.
I can't. I love it. I still can't. So that's how much is in yes. Now, the role it plays in the body, and this is, again, pre-supplementation. What creatine does for you and I, pre-supplementation. And when it specifically talks about the role, I think what I want to cover real quick is a Cliff Note version of how it interacts with ATP, especially when we're in the gym. I want to go through that real quick, because I think when people understand that piece, they start to get, oh, this is how it helps improve performance. So
that's my favorite part.
Let's break it down to a simple level. ATP is also known as adenosine triphosphate, right? Now, creatine, like we talked about before, is stored as phosphocreatine in muscle tissue. Phospha, so adenosine triphosphate, phosphocreatine's over here, right? As you contract your muscle, it uses ATP as its fuel source, right? Now, in that muscle contraction, ATP breaks down into something called ADP, right? It loses a phosphate molecule, right? Adenosine triphosphate turns into adenosine diphosphate, which is no longer usable for the next contraction. Now, phosphocreatine donates its phosphate molecule to ADP, quickly and readily recycling it back into usable ATP again, right? Now, I know that just went in a big circle, but essentially think of it as just lending its helping hand to what our muscle needs to contract for energy. That's all it's doing. So that's what creatine does when anybody goes into the gym to lift weights, right? Especially in those first few. It's your first source of fuel during heavier resistance training.
Yep.
So it helps recycle ATP and ADP so you can continue to use it. Now, when you supplement with creatine, it simply increases how much creatine is stored in muscle tissue by a little bit, right? Not by a lot, but it increases how much creatine is stored in the muscle. So like we were talking about as a fuel source, imagine if instead of a gas tank I know we talked about this before, imagine having a gas tank for 20 gallons. That's what the normal human would have. 20 doesn't mean anything, but a 20-gallon gas tank, supplementing with it just increases the size of your gas tank, right? From 20 to, let's say, 25 gallons. What gas tank is going to get you further on the road? The 25 gallons. what's going to get you further during exercise? Is it going to give you a few more repetitions? Is it going to help you improve your strength by a little margin? Yes, that's what supplementing with it does, is it increases what you already have. So that's what I think a special role, or at least how I would describe the role, would be. Do you want to add on, or do you want to take it deeper?
Yeah, I think I want to add on to an important layer of this is it provides energy for maximal short-term exercise, anaerobic exercise. You are not using oxygen. Aerobic, you're using oxygen. So say you're a long distance runner. This phosphocreatine stores, that's not going to be your primary energy source, maybe in like the first few seconds of starting, but for sustained energy, for performance, for endurance, creatine, that's not where creatine works. It's really for that maximum like power output, very, very short duration. So having those two, like to distinguish between those two, and there's really not much evidence out there for creatine being a helpful aid in long distance like endurance activities. So I feel like that's important to lay out.
Big time. Yeah, it's what's used in the first few seconds, usually under 10 seconds of higher intensity exercise. The sprints, the swim run sprints, the cycling sprints, or weight training specifically.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Before
So think about like your 1 rep max, how it could take you to the next level there. Or like I said, like a 50-meter dash. Really quick, fast energy, not sustained.
Exactly. Yeah. And it pretty much goes like this. I think the way you can think about it, I know we've talked about this and this might be a little too deep, is as far as what your body uses for energy as you're going through exercise. We start off all with the phosphocreatine system. We all start there. After about 10 to 15 seconds, we switch over to the glycolytic system, or using stored glycogen, stored carbohydrates as fuel. After about 45 to 60 seconds, when those fuel tanks run out, that's when we turn over to oxidative. And that's, again, aerobic. Those are things that are going to be sustained. So the phosphocreatine is just that initial booster. Think of it as like a mushroom in Mario, right? That first little thing to give you that like big push, and then everything else kind of continues to get you through. So that's what creatine does, and that's what it does in everybody who supplements with it or not. So all supplementing with it does is, again, it just increases the size of that gas tank. Now, I know a lot of people, and I think we're going to touch on this a few times throughout this entire podcast. We're making this seem like it is the holy grail of supplements, which I think, and anybody in the industry would agree, it probably is the holy grail of supplements. But what holy grail means to us versus just to someone hearing this is probably very different. We just want to make sure, yes, it's incredible. It's incredible for a supplement. And what's supplement's role? It just gives you can give you that small increase in performance. I think most people look to supplements for making the change, for being the thing that made them lose 40 pounds, for being the thing that made them muscle man of the year, that made them run a mile under 6 minutes. That's not what supplements are, right? That's not what it's your training, it's your nutrition, it's your lifestyle. Those are going to get you there. As far as supplements speaking, give you that extra boost. Creatine is just the best as far as what can give you that small boost.
Yeah.
I think we should, I just wanted to touch on that before we go. I'm like, we are making this seem like anabolic steroids to a point.
And if you're not putting in the work, if you're not going to the gym, if you're not focusing on your diet, no, creatine's not going to magically make you strong and give you muscles, and you have to put in the work to see its effects. And I think that this is something that isn't discussed enough in our industry. We get so giddy about it because this is so rare to see similar results across so many groups of people. And, it is effective. It does work. And we look at, wow, our bodies are so fascinating. They are so cool in terms of how they can change, what they can do, like how much hard work can change what your body's capable of producing. And then you could go this whole other level of, my body's done all of the work it can do. Something else can give me the little tiny extra push to make me the best. That is so fascinating.
Yeah.
But work has to come from that.
Yes, that's why we get so excited about it. I was like, if you match our energy, you would have think that we just discovered like the cure for cancer. Is what I was getting. That's why I was like, okay, maybe I'll back off a little bit.
No, because this is so real. This is such an issue. People don't like to believe how difficult it is to do research on dietary supplements, and of course, there are flaws. There always are going to be. You're working with human beings who are different, but the consistencies and just how much research is out there is so rare, and people don't really think about that. But yeah.
So before we get into the actual research, which I wanted to cover a couple really cool studies on strength, on what you can realistically expect. I think getting into expectations would be the next logical step here, to set expectations of what's actually going to change. Because again, will it improve your lean body mass? Yes. Is over time it helpful? And I think this is what kind of people misconfuse words, right? Who it's for, I think we can all agree on. Who it's for is someone who wants to increase their strength, increase their lean body mass. If you want to lose body fat, it would be a supplement that you would take. It's not going to help you lose body fat, but it has the properties of helping with muscle protein breakdown. It's going to help preserve muscle as you lose weight, which is advantageous, making it helpful for fat loss. But that doesn't mean it's going to help you lose fat. I think that's something to kind of clear up. So realistic expectations, who should be taking this? Like we said, if you're an athlete, if your goal is to lose fat, would this help? Yes. If your goal is to build muscle and strength, should you take this? Yes, it would help. If you don't work out and you're just looking to help preserve muscle mass, which is massively important as you age, just from a longevity standpoint, would this help? Yes. For cognitive decline, will this help? Probably. Most people should be taking this. What can you expect out of it is, I think, where we're going with it next. Okay, so what can you expect out of it? So as you start taking creatine, the supplement, as you start supplementing, like we said, it increases how much creatine is stored in your body. So how we would dose it, and let's do a quick pause real quick. I think what makes the most type is how to dose it, how to actually take it, what you can expect to see out of it, and then we can get in the studies.
Yeah, and I also think we should talk about people, like there are people that maybe shouldn't take it, and like just like a little disclaimer there. And I would love to talk about the difference between men and women and the lack of studies on women with creatine.
Big time. Which actually, now that you say that, I haven't thought about that too much. A lot of the studies on depression that I read with creatine were majority women based, but the majority of performance based studies, women are highly underrepresented. That's weird.
Yeah. Well, that's a whole greater issue of men not coming out about their mental health issues. So it's harder to recruit them for studies on mental health.
This is going to be deep. Okay. Time in. Okay. So we're going to talk about dosing, who it's for, who it's not for. Let's talk about who it's not for first.
Yep.
Right? Who it's not for. Because, again, not everything's black and white. Who do you think this might not be the best idea to take?
Yeah. So first off, any supplement, we're not doctors. We don't know you. We don't know what's going on with your body. You discuss with your primary care doctor, and you make sure it's going to be right for you. We're just here to talk about the science and the research, get that out of the way. But there are definitely some people that may not benefit from it. Like if you have kidney disease, there is like pregnant and breastfeeding women. Maybe it's not the best, but that actually, the jury's still out on that. But of course, pregnant women are a high-risk group, so that's why there's very few human trials with pregnant women as a whole. And then also, I guess you can chime in on this. If you're under 18, you're still growing, you're younger, you would definitely, I know there are some high school students that may use it. I think this really just comes down to that's not our decision to say or make. If you're doing it with the guidance of your trainer and your coach and your doctor gives the approval, that's a whole different layer.
Yeah. And I think a good caveat there is it's not that we're saying that it's dangerous for these people. It's that like the risk to reward probably just is worth it just to wait. If you're pregnant, it's not like creatine is going to be the thing that makes or breaks your health over this pregnancy. Just take it later. Same thing if you're in high school. You don't need that tiny little boost. You just don't need. It's
You're still growing too. So you don't want to interfere with that process. And then again, any supplement, high risk groups. So people with chronic diseases, maybe the elderly, children, like those are all high risk groups. So naturally that's something that you're not going to recommend. Any supplement, anything, like you shouldn't recommend it to a high risk group. That's just how it works. That's not who they're studied on.
Yeah.
It's otherwise healthy individuals.
Big time. Yeah, you have kidney disease previously, it's going to pass through. Maybe something you don't take. Kidney and liver disease, maybe not something you look into. But yeah, pregnant women, especially high school, like how young can you take it? Because that's huge, especially on the internet right now, especially high school kids getting into weight training. Mm-hmm. They see all the bodybuilders, they see the Mr. Olympias, and they say, I want to look like that. What are they doing? What are they doing? Oh, they take creatine. I need to take creatine. Kind of like the swimmer's body illusion. Mm-hmm. The risk to reward, is it going to do anything bad to you? Probably not. But is the small, tiny added benefit that it's going to give you worth it? No, just wait until we know for certain.
Yeah.
I think that's a safe way to kind of call it. And then who it's for, obviously, it would make sense in people with goals ranging from gaining muscle, gaining strength, losing body fat, just protecting their muscle mass as they age if you don't train, if you don't work out. And people who are honestly even looking for the small cognition benefits over time, it makes sense. It could help with all of those. So who it's for, who it's not for, I think that's a solid way to look at it.
And I also then think another disclaimer and something to think about, and this is a common question women have. There's so many myths around females taking it, which we'll get into later, but a lot of the studies in terms of performance-based outcomes with creatine, a lot of them are done on men. The majority are done on men. Why women are so underrepresented in a lot of these studies, just in the health and fitness world as a whole, is a greater issue. But that's also something to consider. And then it's also important to consider that your intramuscular creatine concentrations, some people may have higher levels, and females may have higher levels of intramuscular creatine, and that's possibly due to lower skeletal muscle mass. So you may not see as much of an effect because you already have higher levels than, say, a man who has lower levels. There's a lot of things to consider because it's really hard to test in these studies what your intramuscular creatine concentrations were to start, because that's a very invasive process. But you can't look at someone and say, oh, well, they saw results in like 2 months or something, and I don't really feel like I noticed anything. Well, maybe your levels were higher to start with. Maybe this person is a vegan or vegetarian and gets absolutely none in their diet. Yeah. So there's a lot of things to consider there, but I wanted to make sure I mentioned that because that is definitely important. Big time.
Yeah. Just like everything else we talk on the podcast, everyone's different. Not everyone's going to respond to something the exact same way. Nothing. Training, diet, supplements, anything. Very good note. What you can expect when you actually start to take this. And we'll talk about the dosing, how you'd actually take it before we get into the actual studies, which I think is important. So how you would actually take it, right? There's multiple forms of creatine, right? Multiple forms. There's creatine monohydrate, which was what most of these studies are actually using. There's micronized creatine. There's creatine HCl, right, which is creatine bound with hydrochloric acid. There's creatine ethyl ester, right? There's a lot of different kinds. Creatine monohydrate, all you need. It's the cheapest, which honestly over the last year, since it's become such a craze, has increased in price quite a bit. But it is the cheapest. It's what's been used in all the research. And any other form of creatine, HCl micronized, when lined up in study, provides no extra benefit. So it's a little more expensive because of the filtering process, but it provides no extra benefit. It's not safer to take. Monohydrate is the clear winner. It's what you want to go with. Would you agree with that?
Yep. Yeah. And I think that's also just so important to disclaim because there are different forms of so many other supplements. So it's just something to think about how, there's a lot of different forms found. Yeah. So you don't need to waste your money just because a bottle says it might have some extra effects.
Yeah. And on that we can even touch on that just with the supplement industry, with how unregulated it is since that Health and Supplement Education Act back in the 90s. Realize supplement companies can put whatever they want on the bottle as far as claims. So just because they're saying, oh, you shouldn't take creatine monohydrate, buy our HCl product because it's going to make you faster, it's going to make you less bloated, it's going to none of those claims have to be true, right? Or proven in any manner. Just realize it's extremely unregulated. So just because they're selling you on it does not mean it's true. Trust us here. The hundreds of studies with creatine monohydrate this is where we're gathering all these incredible information, and it still has not been beaten when you compare it to any other form.
Yeah, and I think it would be just a funny side note if you do have creatine or you already have it, you know it, like go look at the bottle, go look at the claims on the label, what it says, because it's probably much more drastic than what we're saying here. And that's just something to keep in mind, because although we're all giddy about it, our claims are not, you know, this cause and effect and these crazy miraculous things that sound too good to be true, which you might see on the bottle, because that's just how marketing works. So
Okay. So here's how you would dose creatine. Like we just said, creatine monohydrate is all you need to worry about. Is micronized creatine, HCl, are those bad for you? If you bought the supplement, if it's in your house, if you have 100 servings, take it. It's not going to give you worse effects. It's just not going to give you a better effect. So creatine monohydrate, you would dose it like this. As little as 3 grams per day is where you notice an increased saturation in muscle tissue, is if you take 3 grams per day. All the way up to, and I know most people, it's slowly evolving, the old recommendation was just take 5 grams a day. Everybody, male, female, no matter your weight, your size, your performance, take 5 grams a day. As it expands, and this just makes more sense, the larger individuals tend to need a little bit more to get the same effect. So anywhere from 3 to 8 grams is now the recommended daily dose. Is it an exact science? No. If you want to just take 5 and not overthink it, you're going to get all the effects that we're going to talk about. If you're a larger human, what I've been pretty much recommending is if you're over 200 pounds, taking up to 8 grams is probably going to help you a little bit more. If you're closer to the 100, 120, 150, you could take as little as 3. But if you want to call it, say, 5 grams per day is what the daily amount would be, right? 5 grams per day. This is every single day, taken every single day, including your rest days, without need to cycle or load. I think that's the biggest thing, without need to cycle or load. And the timing of day does not matter. The timing of day does not matter. You can take it with whatever you want, before you work out, after you work out, before you go to bed, right when you wake up. What matters is that you take it every single day. That's how you saturate your muscle. Now, I do want to cover the highlight of loading and cycling, which is old school mentality. Do you have anything to add before I jump into that on the dosing?
No.
Perfect. All right. So what loading and cycling is, loading, or what you've heard of before, is it takes about 3 to 4 weeks of taking creatine 5 grams per day to fully saturate your muscle tissue. If you load creatine, meaning on the first 4 to 7 days, take a much higher dose, upwards of 20 grams per day, you can saturate your muscle tissue as little as a week. Right? So if you want to fully saturate your muscle, you can load creatine in the first 4 to 7 days. That is typically, though, when I've noticed anecdotally with my clients, with myself, that's typically when you see the side effects like bloating, like cramping, like excess just peeing all the time, is during those loading phases. Just know you don't need one. Creatine is one of those supplements that you should be planning on taking every day for the foreseeable future, not a short period of time. So if that's your game plan, I don't see a need to load, just because you're going to get there 2 weeks after you normally would.
Yeah.
Right? Cycling is a very old school mentality where people used to treat it like a steroid. I think this is where people say, oh, I think my mom even told me this, creatine's a steroid, right? Absolutely not, but it was treated like one previous when we didn't have as much information about it. Cycling creatine essentially is when people used to, not anymore, do 4, 6, 8 weeks on of taking the supplement, followed by 2 to 4 weeks of not taking the supplement. This is a style that was previously more used for like anabolic steroids, right? If you're injecting testosterone and you want to fully recover and not have any negative long-term effects, you would typically take the steroid for 30, 60, 90, 120 days at a time before taking a cycle phase where you don't take it, allowing your body to bounce back, recover, and start performing like normal, right? So you don't become dependent on it. That's what you do with anabolic steroids, things that are suppressing your body's natural function of making hormones. Creatine does not do that. If you stop taking creatine, the only thing that's going to happen is over the next following weeks, your muscles are going to become less saturated. Your performance might come down a little bit, right? Just like that little bit it came up, but nothing else is going to happen. You don't go into a negative rebound phase like you would with steroids, right? That's the loading and cycling phase. You don't need it. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, and I want to talk about, I like that you mentioned the cramping and bloating and brought that up, because it is a common concern, especially with women, that you're going to be bloated, You might gain weight. It's going to make you crampy. Something that's important to know about creatine and that can ease that distress is that it's an osmotically active substance. So an increase in the body's creatine content could theoretically result in increased water retention in the short term. This has been shown to not be the case in a variety of long-term studies. Yeah. So intracellular water is an important signal for protein synthesis and thus drives an increase in muscle mass over time. So that if it does happen to you, which it doesn't typically happen, but if it did, that's maybe just some discomfort temporarily, and typically it takes like I think it's like 7 to 9 days for it to subside. Yeah. It's really temporary, but it's also very not common for the majority of people. So
yeah, big time. And we'll talk more about that when we get into the questions and myths, but that is a very important note. If you are worried about the bloating from creatine, just don't load it. If you don't go through a loading phase, odds are you are not going to see any of that. And if you do want to load it because you want to saturate it just a few days and weeks before it would if you just took it consistently every day, just know it's going to go away in a week or two, right? It's going to go away in a week or two, that minor discomfort. Now, I think as far as dosing, that answers most questions, right? Before we get into the myths, the other questions that go along with it, you take 5 grams every single day. Timing of day does not matter. You do not load, you do not cycle, period, the end, right? Like that's pretty much all that goes into it. If you miss a day, you don't double up the next day. Just take it every day, like a multivitamin.
I have a question, Tony.
Yeah.
Does this mean that I have to take it forever?
Yeah. No. No, you don't have to. It's like a multivitamin, right? You can take it if you miss a day. You miss a day. Do you have to take it forever? No. Without fear of coming off. Just like the cycling issue, there's no need to cycle it because nothing bad happens if you stop taking it.
Yes.
So if this is something that you want to try for the next couple months, give it 3 to 6 months consistently. If you like or notice the effects, keep taking it. If you're like, you know what, this is just another supplement that I have to spend $20 on every couple months, or it's just something I can't continue to remember to do in the morning when I wake up, you don't have to take it, right? Nothing negative. You're not going to have that rebound effect.
Yeah.
You are not going to have that rebound effect. So very good question. And to be fair there, you do have to take it consistently to notice an effect. I notice a lot of people can't remember to take it every single day, so they'll take it 3 or 4 days and then not take it for 3 or 4 and be like, it didn't do anything for me. It's like, well, that's because you're not taking it correctly. Yeah. That's why I always recommend too, when dosing it, it usually makes sense to take it with something that is more of a, what's the word I'm looking for here?
Like
more of a trigger-based, yeah, something that's more of like a trigger-based cue instead of like a reminder, right? What's something you do every day? If you have a protein shake every morning for breakfast, take it then. Yeah. You don't have to remember, oh, is it going to absorb slightly better if I take it right after my workout? Okay, all right, what if you miss a workout? What if you don't work out 7 days a week? All these things can come up. Take it with something that you do every day. Put it next to your toothbrush, right? It's not going to affect the absorption rate. Just take it every day, right? What you can expect to see, let's set realistic expectations. What you can expect to see from supplementing with creatine, right? In the few weeks as you get saturated, right? You will start to notice that you might be able to get an extra 1, 2, or 3 repetitions while you are weight training on each movement, right? You might notice the weight that you used to move, if you could bench press 135 for 10 reps, you might be able to get 11 or 12 now, right? Just because of that creatine. Same thing with your sprint time. You might notice you can go a few extra seconds before coming to complete exhaustion. You might be able to increase your speed by a small 5-10% after taking it, right? Mainly coming down to your training though, especially weight training, you might be able to extend your sessions a little bit longer. You might be able to train with heavier weights later in the workout or training session than you used to. You're going to start noticing those small improvements over time. Now, a big thing is talking about body composition, what you can realistically expect, right? Because I say this all the time. If you have the goal of fat loss, creatine would help get you to your goal. By that, I do not mean that taking creatine will help you lose fat. You have to realize why and what it's doing. Creatine has also been shown in study numerous times to have a very anti-catabolic effect, right? It doesn't break, it helps your body hold on to muscle tissue, right? It helps your body hold on to muscle tissue, which during a fat loss phase is very important. So that's why it makes sense to take it during a fat loss phase. It's not going to help you lose fat, but it's going to help you hold on to lean body mass like muscle, which is very, very, very important from a metabolic standpoint during fat loss. That, and it's also going to increase your training potential, a little bit. So if you're training harder, is that going to help your goal towards fat loss? Yes. If you're able to train a little bit harder over time, that compounds. So I think that's a realistic expectation to expect. If you take creatine from now for 30 days, you're not going to notice that you now have a six-pack when you used to not be able to see your abs. But you will notice an increase in strength. You will notice a slight increase in endurance. And you might notice a small increase in lean body mass due to just water retention through that. And I think that's the next point I wanted to cover. In study, you can look at this, and this is even on, I think there's over 20 studies done on this. Does it increase lean body mass like muscle? Asterisk, yes. Increases lean body mass. Does it build more muscle tissue? No. You have to realize, just like carbohydrates, stored glycogen is stored with, I think it's 1 gram of glycogen needs to be stored with 3 to 4 grams of water. It needs that to be stored. So that's usually why people notice an increase in scale weight when they jump their carbs. If they're eating less than 100 a day to 200, they're going to gain a few pounds of water retention just because of the extra water needed to store the glycogen. Same thing with creatine. When it's stored intramuscular, it needs water to be stored, right, in your muscle tissue. So does it increase slightly the size of muscle mass? Yes. I think people, when they start taking this, at least I've gotten this in my comments 100 times, people expect to see the visible change, like, holy crap, I'm a lot bigger because I started taking creatine. No. It's going to slightly increase how much water is retained inside your muscle, which is a good thing, right? It helps you get a leaner, more defined look. You want lean body mass. It's a good thing to have more of, right? It's not going to bulk you up like people think is going to happen when you start lifting heavy weights. It's not going to do that. So realistic expectations, it's something that the progress compounds more over time, right? You notice more from creatine the longer you use it. It's not something that gives immediate results. And it's not going to completely change your game. Realize that. It's not, as excited as we are, it's not going to change your game. But it will make a notable difference.
About in the sense that it amplifies the effects of resistance training slightly. Enough to make a difference in terms of strength, hypertrophy, power, daily living. So it is that it can make it slightly better, which you will see improvements over time if you are properly and consistently resistance training and paying attention to diet. So you would see results over time, and then you take this and it's gonna, I really think you hear a lot, and I'm not sure if you hear this from your clients ever, Tony, but people feel it. And that is huge when you can feel those small changes in the gym, and when people switch their kind of mindset in terms of how they're tracking their progress of, wow, like I do feel stronger versus like, I have a six-pack now or something like that, which is just,
Entering into it, people expect changes on the scale or visually right off the bat. But I think we've talked about this. Nothing builds your confidence in doing what you're doing than feeling that increase in physical capability. Like, holy crap, that weight a month ago was impossible, and I just did it and felt under control. That's going to make you feel better than 5 pounds less on the scale, than noticing something in the mirror. Feeling that capability that your body now has makes a difference. I think in great. That's a huge point. That's a great
and
point.
regardless of whether you were taking creatine or not, but that is it can have the slightest bit of a difference to make you feel that even more.
100%. So let's now dive deep, and let's actually do this. I'm going to cut this back real quick as a clip for social. Here's what happens when you stop taking creatine. Just like it took 3 to 4 weeks to fully saturate your muscle tissue with creatine, so you start noticing those extra benefits, right? Being able to grab an extra 1 or 2 reps while you're working out, increasing your sprint time by just a fraction, right? Just like you took a few weeks to start noticing that small but notable increase, after a few weeks, when you immediately stop taking it, nothing's going to happen. Your muscle tissue is still saturated. But over the coming weeks, you're going to lose saturation back down to your starting level, not below, but to your starting level. And you might start noticing, just like you noticed a small increase in strength, you'll notice weights might become a little bit more challenging. That last 1 or 2 reps might become a little bit more challenging at the weight you're used to. Are you going to lose any of the progress that you made while taking creatine? No. If you gained 10 pounds of lean body mass over a year and you were taking creatine, you're not going to lose any of that. You're going to keep everything you gained. If you lost 10 pounds of fat, you're not going to magically gain fat back because you stopped taking it. The saturation is going to return back to normal. You're going to lose that extra 1 or 2 repetitions of strength, and you go on with your day. I think that's important to note when you stop taking it. Now it's time to dive into some studies. This is what I want. I think the first one I want to go over, and I think this is the first one that at least caught my eye, so I'm hoping it caught some people listening to this eye, is its role in depression and the more and more research going on with that. I think it's something to touch on. I don't think this is something that you can say, oh, if you suffer from depression, go take this will fix it. No, that's not what we're saying at all. But it's really freaking interesting to start noticing a notable effect on this. Now, the one study I pulled up, it was a little bit smaller, right? It was done with 52 women, right, with major depressive disorders, an 8-week double-blind, placebo randomized controlled clinical trial. Those are my favorite.
The gold standard,
and it was
the holy grail.
The holy grail, the gold standard, right? Those are the most controlled. Now, it was done at University College of Medicine in South Korea. Now, what they noticed, I think this is, again, any consistent and notable effect, I think is something cool. I think it's something to get excited about. Now, over that 8-week trial, they had individuals take 5 grams of creatine per day with their SSRI or just an SSRI by itself. And what they used to measure progress was something called the HAM-D scale to measure subjective progress. I can link that in the show notes below if you're interested. But this study came out at the end suggesting that creatine augmentation of SSRI treatment may be a promising and therapeutic approach that exhibits a more rapid and efficacious response to SSRI, which I thought was kind of cool, where lining this up, it didn't replace the SSRI, but SSRIs typically take a little bit longer to round out time. Having creatine in your system, in this study at least, was shown to speed up the effects, right? To notice these things quicker, which if you're suffering from depression, I can imagine helps quite a bit. So I think that is one of many cool studies now being done, showing that this might have a very important role in mental health outside of just the athletic performance that we've been talking about this whole time. That was one of the coolest ones I've found.
Yeah, I agree. And I think these mental health studies, especially, these people are still doing the work to get their mental health at a place where they can live and function. They're taking the SSRIs. And I just think it's so fascinating how, it's nothing in isolation. Just like with working out, you're still working out, you're still putting in the work. It may have this slightest bit of a difference and to make your quality of life better or to make your performance better. So it's not an all or nothing concept, but when you're talking about your mental health, the tiniest changes in terms of your ability to function on a day-to-day basis, you can have the slightest bit of a change and that changes your life. So it's the potential of these studies, and it's promising that this is enough data to move forward. Let's have larger studies.
Yeah.
Let's expand into, people who aren't taking SSRIs. And that's what research does. And that's why it is incredible, because the basis of this, and it just started out as a theory. And now we have some data to continue to understand this and see how we can make people's lives better.
What doesn't it do? What doesn't it do? No, that's why it's exciting. And it's more, again, a study with 52 people. You can't say anything, you can't draw any conclusions from that. But it does give you enough to keep pushing in that direction, saying, hey, there might be something here.
You can draw conclusions in terms of, what the potential this has to say, conclusions for future research, because it is such a small population, but you still have enough people. You need at least 30 people to make a statistically significant analysis to draw these conclusions, inform future research. So yes, it's a small study, but it's enough to say these findings were significant. We need to recruit more people for this. We're going to get more funding for this because of this data. This is so promising.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And I'm a big fan of just mental health research in general, because if we look at human beings, our knowledge of mental health is in its very infant stages. Like, we don't know anything, relatively speaking, about it. Like 200 years ago, they were poking people's brains. Like, it was like, we did not know about this stuff that long ago. This is a newer kind of field. So it's really interesting to see growth in any area or promise in any area. That's why I got so freaking excited, because this might not be like, oh, we might not find out because of this that creatine, is something that we should be taking for mental health, but it might lead us to a path that helps us discover another function or another anecdote that really kind of helps us out, which I think is super, super interesting. So I wanted to start there. And there's a few studies done that we can also, we'll just link a lot of studies. And now let's talk about the cool stuff in performance, right? The cool stuff in performance that we were just talking about. That I think a lot of people listening, that's why they would have added this into their protocol previously, right? Now, there's a lot of individual one-off studies done. And again, you can find all these on examine.com, which is really, really cool. I pulled one from Bloomsburg University, right? This was a review of 22 different studies, right? Showing a range of effect. These were all done on younger individuals, right? Looking at strength and endurance. And the effects were noticeable, right? The effects were noticeable in control groups taking no creatine supplement versus the creatine supplemented group. Across the board in strength, performance increased quite a bit, right? On 1, 3, and 10 repetition maxes on all compound movements, the control group noticed an 8% fewer increase in overall strength over a period of different studies, right? From a 12% increase in strength to a 20% in the creatine. Max repetitions performed was 14% greater than the control group, right? From 12% increase over the course of the study in the control group to 26% in the creatine only group, right? Bench press 1 rep max increased between 3 and 45% over the control group. I'm not saying you'd be on either end of the spectrum, but in the study that they reviewed, between 3 and 45%. And bench press performance increase range between 16 and 43% over the control group as well. So in every single study done on strength here, you were noticing double-digit increases in strength over the period of these studies, which ranged anywhere from 4 to 12 weeks, which again is more short term. But in that short amount of time, that's a pretty big difference.
Yeah. And I'm glad you brought that up, because the long-term studies on creatine are much more scarce and are still like being conducted as we speak. But that's something to consider too, because longer term studies are definitely needed, but it has still been established that it is safe to take for these populations of people who aren't at risk. So, but that is important to know.
Big time, big time. And I think in 2 other places I want to go to, its effect on body composition specifically, and its therapeutic role, right? We're talking about how, we can't just not live up to this hype. We're talking about how this could be more beneficial and better implemented than a multivitamin to any human being, regardless of athlete or not, as you age. There's even more and more ongoing research in the therapeutic role in aging adults, which I think is really, really cool, showing it increases functionality, strength, and daily activities, delaying fatigue, and saving onto muscle mass in older adults as you age, right? I've been trying to sell my mom on creatine for, I cannot tell you how long, but I keep sending her research. I'm going to get her to take it. She turns 60 next year. That's my goal, is to get her to take creatine. But again, functionality, notable improvements in all across the board in aging adults. Now, the effect it has on body composition, right? Meaning when we look at studies over time, if this is a controlled weight loss study and they have a creatine group versus a control group, who sees greater weight loss, fat loss, and fat-free mass changes? Same thing when we're looking at muscle gain studies. Is there a difference in control group or creatine loading groups? Final piece of research that we want to pull up here is effect on body composition and performance. Now, body composition more specifically, this was posted in the Human Kinetics Journal. They noticed that over review consistently lined up in body composition changes, especially over weight loss. So what I mean by that is when we talk about body composition change over weight loss, we've talked about this numerous times on the show. There's a big difference between losing weight and losing fat, right? So it's important as you're measuring through these studies, you're not just measuring scale weight differences when you're going through different trials. For example, if we have 2 groups set to a weight loss diet, one's taking creatine, one is not, you don't want to just look at their body weight. You want to look at their body composition change as well, in their lean body mass, in their body fat. Because when we talk to our clients, first call every single time, most people say they want to lose weight, but they don't. They just want to look better. They want to have improved composition, right? They want to be leaner. They want to have a little more muscle mass, a little less body fat. They don't really care what the scale says. They care about how they look and how they feel, right? And what they notice is consistently, and there's not as much research in this area yet, but consistently in the research done, is that during weight loss trials, the creatine only groups held on to significantly more lean body mass in the process, along with losing a little bit more body fat That's what kind of caught my eye, because you knew they would hold on to a little bit more muscle. You could guess that they would hold on to a little bit more muscle. But I think the improved performance and helping hold on to a little bit of extra lean body mass may have resulted in a larger calorie out, which helped them lose a little bit more fat during the study as well. Same thing in lean body mass or building trials, right? Is you consistently notice that the group taking creatine builds significantly more muscle tissue over the course of the trial than those who don't, if dietary guidelines are strictly the same, right? So body composition wise, fat loss, muscle gain, this is something that over time can help. So that's the last piece that I wanted to jump into a little bit. Before we get into probably the favorite section is the questions that people have about creatine, the myths that surround creatine. I'm gonna let you roll in on this one. Where do we want to start? Because we got, it's bad for your kidneys, it causes hair loss, it causes bloat, it causes weight gain. Where do you want to start? We got anywhere to start.
I think we can definitely start with the hair loss, because I feel like that's a very common question people have, and it's also one of the biggest misconceptions. I'd say that and the weight gain that has purely come about due to misinterpretation of studies. And so I guess we could talk about hair loss.
Okay,
and
I'll tackle hair loss, and then we could go into, I want you to talk about kidney function, because that's the next biggest thing. Is people say it's bad for your kidneys, right? It's bad for your kidneys, which once we break it down logically, it'll make sense why it's not. But hair loss, this one gets me, because for some reason, whenever I post about this topic of creatine, everyone and their mom is the first to race and to say, it'll cause you to lose your hair. It'll cause you to go bald. Here's this one study that proves that. I think this is the funniest thing, I think, when people quote unquote interpret data, right, is that they just misuse their words, right? To prove something doesn't just mean one study with 14 people in it. You can't prove anything. So this is where the hair loss comes from, right? There's really zero data to support, right? So there was one, and this is where myths start, is usually off of one small trial, right? There was one randomized controlled trial over the course of 3 weeks in 20 college-aged rugby players, right? 20 college-aged rugby players over the course of 3 weeks. That's the big thing I want to stick out. That's it. There was no follow-up. There was nothing after this. It was the course of 3 weeks as they were loading creatine, right? Loading is in taking 20 grams of creatine per day for the first 7 days, and then 5 grams a day for the following 14 days of the study. What they noticed is that androgens that generally led to hair loss, right? Not just DHT, but androgens in general, had a very significant increase over baseline, right? And DHT, for those unfamiliar, is a metabolite of testosterone, usually linked to what causes male pattern baldness as you age. So people see this study, they say, okay, crap, in 3 weeks taking creatine significantly increased the thing that makes people go bald, right? That's how they saw it. They increased the thing that makes people go bald, right? Which obviously is something to bat your eyes at. Here's the problem. It's never been replicated once, has not been replicated. There has been 13 other studies measuring for these androgens that notice little to no effect, or at least no notable effect at all across 13 other studies. Meaning when you're measuring DHT, when you're measuring testosterone, nothing changes when you start taking creatine versus when you stop, or if you're not, right? So I think that's the biggest thing. And when you look at literature as a whole, you can't cherry pick your data like this to support your cause, right? In this case, if less than, about 7 or 8% of research points in one direction and over 90% points in the other direction, and these are trials done over the course of months, not just weeks, you can safely assume in one direction, right? So that's where the myth typically comes from. I think what people kind of do this is men that are genetically predispositioned to hair loss. If you're going to lose your hair, you're going to lose your hair. That's just something that we kind of know by now. So if you take creatine and you were going to lose your hair anyways, you're still going to lose your hair. You would have lost it without creatine too. So I think people see that. A lot of men who are affected by male pattern baldness will see it and they'll be like, how could this happen to me? It must be XYZ. They want to find something to blame. They'll blame creatine, but they won't just say, oh, you know what? Maybe my dad and his 4 uncles are all bald. I was probably going to go bald anyways. I think that's a big place where the hair loss myth comes from and why it's not something to worry about. And I know even Legion right now, I don't know if you knew this, they're actually funding an ongoing trial to deeper interpret long-term results of hair loss in creatine to continue to prove it, which I think is super cool. So it hasn't been published yet, but it's ongoing research right now. Now here's a big one too. Men care about hair loss the most. I think they're the most insecure about it.
Yeah.
I think if you're bald, you do it. But women also, that scares the crap out of women, right? It's nothing to worry about here. But when it comes to actual safety, is this going to harm me? The number one myth I hear is it's bad for your kidneys. It causes kidney damage. Shed some light on that.
Yeah. So a lot of these assumptions can be rooted in very sound theories based off of how our bodies work. So high creatinine levels in your urine are a sign of kidney dysfunction because there's filtered out in the blood. And if they're in extremely high amounts, that means your kidney's not filtering it properly. So if you're not supplementing with creatine and your creatinine levels are high, they're high because of an internal cause. And yeah, you may have some issues with your kidneys. That's a possible explanation. So that has, one, nothing to do with supplementation, very different. However, of course, that could pose some concerns if that gets slightly skewed or slightly misinterpreted. But creatinine is also a byproduct of digesting creatine. So if you are, say, you excrete some more in your urine because you're supplementing with it, that doesn't mean that you have kidney disease. Probably the first question your doctor would ask you is, oh, are you supplementing with creatine? Yeah, okay, cool. Are there any other signs that my kidney may be functioning poorly? Which there would be, but if if you saw this change and the only change you made was taking creatine, that's a very sound explanation. Of course, I am not your doctor, something they would figure out with you. But it's very, I understand why people would draw that conclusion. However, that is not because of the creatine. It's just you may be excreting a little bit more because you've kind of you've maxed out on your stores, or it's very common when you're supplementing.
Yeah.
So
when you see smoke, you think fire.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
That's usually what people do. When you see smoke, you see fire. And you said it perfectly. When you aren't supplementing and you have high creatinine levels, I always screw up when I talk about the two words, creatinine levels, something could be going wrong with how your kidneys are filtering it out. Mm-hmm. That's an internal issue. Yeah. But if you're not and you start supplementing with creatine and it increases creatinine levels, that's an external cause. So it's an internal versus external cause. Just because you see smoke doesn't automatically mean fire, right? Yeah. That's the biggest thing. And there's been over 13 different studies, all 100% in unison, showing that it does not impact overall kidney function at all.
Yeah.
Not at all in healthy individuals. If you already have a poorly functioning kidney, ask your doctor first.
Or just don't take it. First. They'll probably say just don't take it. That is where it becomes that's very easy to fearmonger because it is a sound theory because that's how the body works and that is correct. But then you just all of a sudden slightly tweak it to say that this is because of the creatine supplementation. It's no, but because that was a sound theory, again, theory informs research. So that's why there's over 13 studies to address this because wow, that mechanism actually makes sense. Is this making it worse or is this an issue? Does this mean our kidneys aren't functioning properly? Mm-hmm. No, it's just a byproduct and you're just excreting it. And it has nothing to do with the fact that your kidneys aren't functioning anymore because you took creatine.
Yes. So. Perfect. Okay. Mm-hmm. So those are the two, I think those are the two biggest by far. Now, others range from, I think another big one is it's going to cause you to bloat. Right? It's going to cause you to bloat. Yeah, which we kind of covered that a little bit. If you're afraid of bloating, just don't go through the loading phase, which I still don't even recommend. Even if you're not afraid of bloating, that's typically when you would notice and it would go away shortly after. This is something I think noticed a lot decades ago when creatine first started coming out as a supplement and it just was not made very well. It did cause some bloating, some extra water retention outside of your muscle. That's not an issue anymore. Yeah. We've got our process down. It only causes water retention intramuscular, which is what you want. Now, another big question, do you need to drink more water when you take it? Are you going to become dehydrated? Is that a risk? What's your answer there?
Well, I'd say your risk slightly increases and if you're working out, if you're strength training, if you're doing what you should be doing to see the effects of creatine, you're already at a greater risk for dehydration because you are working out more. And if you're not properly hydrating after that, during that on your recovery days, then yeah, maybe creatine could have the slight, again, it's the slight added effects of making that dehydration a little bit worse. But if you are properly hydrating, you're focusing on your water intake, you understand that you're training harder, so your needs are going to be a little bit higher, you're going to be okay. But just like anything, like dehydration is a huge risk of exercise. So it's really hard to say like the creatine caused the dehydration when you're doing so many other things that put you at risk for dehydration.
Yeah. Well, and here's my thing. It's like you should just always drink a good amount of water, right? Like if you're drinking a good amount of water and you start taking creatine, you don't have to drink more. Yeah. Just keep drinking a good amount of water. If you're thirsty, drink. It's those who it's like when they come in, they're like, it's like, okay, how many glasses of water would you say you're drinking per day? You're getting at least 8, which I think is bare minimum. Like, I have a coffee in the morning and then like a juice at lunch and then like a pre-workout, but I don't think I had any water. It's like, what are you talking about? Yeah. Just that's creatine around just to be healthy. Just drink more water. Right?
Yeah.
That's usually it.
And again, this has only been proven in the case of severe body water loss. So if you are exercising to the point where you are losing a significant amount of water through sweat, then yes, creatine can have the added risk of, wow, you're going to suffer from dehydration, some like electrolyte imbalance. But the root cause of this is the body water loss and lack of proper rehydration. So, but if you are a person that knows you tend to sweat a lot more and you don't monitor your water intake as much and it's something that you struggle with, like pay extra close attention to it.
100%. Yeah. If you're at risk for dehydration regardless, you're going to be there with or without creatine supplementation. Yeah. It might, again, the effect might be this small, but it's just drink more water. It's the thing. I think the last big one that we kind of already answered that we got a lot in the Q&A before is it just water weight? Is the muscle you gain, is the progress you make, is it just water weight? We already kind of answered this one a little bit before. Absolutely not. If you gain 2 to 5 pounds, depending on how large of an individual you are, off of water retention, the progress that you see in the coming weeks, months, is 100% not just water weight, right? I've seen too many videos. It's like, oh, here's me, I'm buff, I'm explaining creatine. It's essentially just water weight. It'll make you look better. It's like, no. We just explained through detail how massively, I don't even know how to say that, how freaking crazy this supplement actually is.
The effect it can actually have. Of it, in terms of like, does water weight help you push more weight? No. Like you wouldn't see the performance effects of it if it was just water and not muscle.
100%. You wouldn't see the performance benefits if it was just water. That's not how it works. So that's a myth that I think I wanted to touch on just because we got a lot in the Q&A. I think maybe the last one too is I see a lot of, and you I think should be the one that answers this one. I get this question more often than not. It's more from women, and it's girls saying, well, can I take it? Or is it just a guy's supplement?
Yeah. Oh yeah, I see that a lot too. But of course you could take it. And I briefly touched on the fact that there isn't as much research from a performance standpoint for women, but a lot of that does have to do with because women on average tend to have more phosphocreatine stores, so you may not see the effects as much. The effects in a study may not be significant because they have a higher level. And this is something that is really difficult because, like I said, getting the baseline intramuscular phosphocreatine stores is extremely invasive. You have to do a muscle biopsy, and it's really hard to get it at baseline. So that's something that's really important to consider is starting points can vary a lot. And that's why with women, you may not see significant results because you may start higher at baseline, but it doesn't mean they don't see the performance effects of it. So yeah, that's definitely something to consider. And females, there's just an even greater fear of gaining weight, and
big time.
It's so much of these have been generated by media and data taken from case studies. So a lot of these case studies with N equals 1, which means the sample size is 1. It's one person. This happened to one person. If one person gained weight and tells their story, that's a case study. So that cannot be extrapolated into any population. You can't draw any conclusions from that. But the fact that your stores are higher may help explain some research showing diminished responsiveness or performance effects on females, but that doesn't mean that you can't have those effects.
Yeah.
It just, you may not see it as fast, or you may not see as much of a difference compared to men. So
Yeah. It's something that essentially, if we break it down, it's something that helps you perform better, recover better. It will help you get to whatever goal your goal is. So if you're a female and you would be a responder, if your goal is to look leaner and more defined, it will help you get there quicker. If you're a man who wants to build significant mass, it will help you get to your goal. Whatever your goal is, it can help get you there a little bit quicker.
Yeah.
Fat loss, leaning out, building more muscle. It's not something that's just associated with muscle, bulk anymore.
yeah.
So that's a big piece too.
And there's the majority of the research that is significant for women over the past decade has been in postmenopausal women, demonstrating that creatine supplementation during a resistance training program can improve muscle mass, upper and lower body strength, and tasks of functionality. So that is huge. So it's really important to consider. And again, those differences in age can make a difference in terms of the effects.
Yeah. Big time. And this is just, again, we're talking about this on a whole, this is the longest episode yet. We're making it seem up. Here's what we kind of say too is, there's no real harm in testing it out too, because
no.
I think anywhere, and I know these numbers, I might be misquoting these numbers, but a certain percentage of male or female people who take it are creatine non-responders, usually due to just having higher levels to start with. But there's a certain percentage, I think it's around 15 to 20% of people who take it and just are non-responders. They don't respond to supplementation. You're not going to know. There's no harm there's nothing bad going to happen if you try it for 2-3 months, see if it helped you with whatever you're trying to accomplish. If the answer is no, you don't have to keep taking it. Nothing bad's going to happen when you stop. There's no risk. There's no danger really involved unless you're in the previously mentioned group. So I think that's a good place to look at it, is if you try it out, notice the effect for yourself and go from there.
For sure.
And last point on the women and gaining weight, because this one's serious, because a lot of girls do this. They'll take it, they'll gain 3 to 5 pounds from water retention, intramuscular. Their physique, if they took progress photos, would have improved, right? Because more lean body mass usually results in a leaner body composition. Weight doesn't equal fat. You have to remember that. And I know, and this really does suck, because a lot of women are taught, and it's just ingrained, to focus on the number on the scale, which is getting, I think, better over time, but it's still there to be focused, to where people work so hard to get that number as low as they can. So anything in the opposite direction, if it took 2-3 months to get that number on the scale down 1, 2, or 3 pounds, and it jumps in the matter of 2 to 3 weeks, sirens are going to go off in your head and say, do not do this again. It's important to realize, is your goal to get that number as low as it can, or is your goal to improve your body composition?
And
to
feel
improve
better.
your overall ability to feel better. And that's the thing. You'll look better too. Most people will look more of how they want while taking it, regardless of the scale. So you have to get over that. And I know that can be a huge check for most people.
And I think it's just, this is more of a personal side note, but it really is that scale. Like, absolutely, as a female, it means so little, especially when you consider your cycle and your height. People ask me all the time, oh, how much do you weigh? I'm like, oh my God, I don't think I've weighed myself in like years, just because, I know I'm a bit more predisposed to having these ideas that, oh my God, I'm 6 feet tall. I'm going to weigh more than the majority of the women I know in my life. And I've also known that at my so-called heaviest, I have felt the best and looked my best. And I think that that's such an important reminder, is when you have those kind of sirens in your head of like, oh, I've been taking creatine, like the scale went up a little bit. It's creatine. It's like, take a step back, look in the mirror. How do you feel? And it's creatine. It has a small effect. Again, a small effect. So it a small but significant effect. And in terms of weight, it's very, very temporary if it does happen to you.
Yeah, that's actually, because again, the scale is a useful tool and can be a useful tool. It's like a hammer, right? You can't build an entire house with a hammer, right? So your progress in your health, the scale can be a tool. I think it's helpful if you're going through a dedicated like fat loss or muscle gain. It can be helpful to know what your weight is doing, just depending on your diet. But especially when it comes to like actual if you're successful or not in what you're trying to accomplish, it really doesn't have anything to do with it. Like logically, it just doesn't make sense. Your scale is not going to tell you if you're feeling better, performing better, looking better in the mirror. Your scale is not going to tell you that. And those are the things that we're all chasing. So it's a helpful tool, but realize it's one out of dozens of tools.
Yeah.
Dozens of tools. So I think that's a tight spot to wrap it up. I think we went pretty
think we
deep. I
wrapped
talked
it
about
up.
an hour,
That was
over an hour on creatine,
Love
which
that.
is big. I'm like, you know what's going to suck is we're still going to get questions and be like, you know what, we didn't cover XYZ. That's going to hurt
That's
a little
okay.
bit, but
You can definitely, how about we have this cool feature now through Spotify where we
Let's test it
can
out.
ask you guys some questions. We can add in some polls. So we'll drop some of those below for you to engage with. If you have any remaining question, we can definitely answer some on TikTok, Instagram, stories. Engage with us as much as possible.
big time. Yeah, we can try that feature. I forgot we had that to answer. And you'll probably always have one-off individual questions that you can always hit us up. Our socials are fs.pod on Instagram and TikTok. Instagram, DM, and messaging is probably the best way if you have questions about it, especially just starting out. We're not highly trafficked over there. Just had a Twitter. We have not tweeted yet, but the Twitter account is Fitness Stuff Pod. And you can find us all there. Our podcasts, are live on YouTube, on Spotify, on Apple Music, anywhere you can find podcasts. So we appreciate you guys listening as we start out. We hope you gained a little bit more insight on creatine today. We hope you start playing with it if you haven't already. And we'll talk to y'all next time.
Yeah. Have a good one.
We love you.